Hi! Welcome back for Chapter 3 of Talking to Dragons by Patricia Reed. Chapter 3, in which they meet a wizard and get wet. The problem was, Shiera was a fire witch who couldn't do anything. On purpose, I mean. Things happened when she got mad, and once in a while a spell worked for her, but most of the time she couldn't make anything happen, which was why she hadn't just burned her way out of the bushes before I got there. She didn't have very many friends because everyone was afraid of her. I could understand that. I mean, with a temper like hers and no way of telling what would happen when she lost it, people had reason to be nervous. On top of that, everyone kept telling her all the things she ought to be able to do because she was a fire witch, like not worrying about nightshades. That was why she got mad at me. She was awfully sick of being told what fire witches could do, especially when she couldn't, and she thought I was starting, so of course she lost her temper. And then, the Society of Wizards heard about this fire witch who couldn't cast spells or anything. They decided it would be a great chance to find out more about fire witches, so a whole bunch of them came and grabbed Shiera right out of the middle of town. Shiera didn't like it. She liked it even less when she found out they wanted her to stand in the middle of a circle of wizards while they threw spells at her to see what would work. I said no, Shiera told me, and they said I didn't have any choice. That's when I burned the head wizard's staff. I don't like wizards. I don't blame you, I said. She nodded and went on. Anyway, it turned out the wizards had brought me to the edge of the enchanted forest, so as long as I was here, I decided to see if there was somewhere in the forest I could find out how to use my magic. Only then I stumbled in here and I couldn't get out. I was afraid the wizards would catch up with me, and I was tired and hungry and mad, and I couldn't make my fire magic work enough to burn even a little hole in these bushes. That's why I was crying. I wished she hadn't mentioned being hungry. Until then, I'd almost forgotten that I hadn't eaten since breakfast. But there wasn't any food inside the hedge, and I wasn't going to try reopening it. I'd already done enough experimenting for one day, and besides, it was getting dark. Your turn. What are you doing in the enchanted forest? Shiera asked when I didn't say anything. I don't know, I said. How can you not know? She demanded. I told you why I came. So I explained about Mother and the wizard. Shiera was very interested. I want to meet your mother, she said, after I learn how to use my magic. Do you think she would teach me how to melt a wizard? I don't know. Shiera thought for a minute. I don't see how you can find out what you're supposed to be doing just by wandering around the enchanted forest. Well, you're planning to wander around until you find out how to use your magic, aren't you? I said. I don't really see the difference. I know what I'm doing, Shiera said. That's the difference. If you knew very much about the enchanted forest, you wouldn't have gotten caught by this hedge. Shiera scowled, then looked suddenly thoughtful. Is it more dangerous to wander around the forest alone than with someone? It depends, I said. 2 people attract more attention than one, but sooner or later everyone in the enchanted forest runs into something dangerous, and when you do get into trouble, it's sort of nice to have someone around to help. Why don't we stay together then? After we get out of this stupid hedge, I mean. As long as neither of us knows exactly where we're going, we might as well wander in the same direction. All right. It sounded like a good idea, especially since it's hard to run into someone completely by accident in the enchanted forest. Then Shiera made me describe Perils in detail, and she decided that he wasn't one of the wizards who had kidnapped her. I wasn't sure whether that was good or bad. Shiera was nice when she wasn't mad, but I was beginning to like her. But if we were going to stick together, we would have 2 sets of wizards looking for us, and that didn't sound good. Shiera was still curious, so I wound up telling her about the sword and the lizard and everything. The sword of the sleeping king, she said thoughtfully when I finished. Well, it sounds important. Can you do that spell again? I'd like to watch. Maybe I could figure it out. I could do it, but I won't, I said. Once was enough. You scared or something? Shiera said scornfully. I'm not scared. I'm being sensible. That was no minor magic I set off. Are you trying to attract attention? No, I suppose you're right. Will you let me see the sword at least? Sure, if you promise not to take it out of the sheath or say any spells or anything, I said. I stood up and started trying to unbuckle the belt. It was hard to do in the dark. Finally, Shiera got tired of waiting and came and helped. It still took a while, and my elbows got in the way again, but finally we managed to get the sword belt off. Shiera took the sheath and squinted at the parts of the sword that showed. I can't see anything, she complained. There isn't much to see, I said. Besides, it's dark. Maybe we should wait until tomorrow. I wanted to see it now. Oh, all right. She handed it back, hilt first. I took it and nearly let go again right away. The tingling was back, the one that reminded me of a bee, and it was a lot stronger than it had been before. Watch out, Shira said. You almost dropped it. It's tingling again, I said. It is? Let me see. I handed the sword back and Shira touched the hilt. I don't feel anything. Are you sure? Of course I'm sure. I reached out and put my hand on the hilt next to Shira's. Ow, I said, and Shira said, oh! And we both dropped the sword. We looked at each other for a minute. What did it feel like to you? I said finally. Like something pulling at me. Shira eyed the sword warily. You can have it back now. I don't want to look at it anymore. I picked up the sword and put it back on. I still wanted to know what it was doing, but I wasn't going to mess around with it in the dark. Shira and I talked a little, but we were both tired, and finally we decided to just go to sleep. We would have plenty of time to experiment in the morning if we still felt like it. Spending the night in the enchanted forest sounds awfully exciting, but it isn't really. Either you stay up all night so the wolves and the nightshades and things don't get you, and they don't, or you fall asleep and they do, or you find someplace safe and sleep there and never know. We slept all night, at least I did, and when we woke up in the morning, the hedge was still there. By that time, I was really hungry, and since there wasn't anything to eat inside the hedge, I was ready to leave. So was Shira. She was still worried about the society of wizards. We brushed most of the moss off our clothes, and I checked the sword, just to be safe. Will you quit fussing with that and come open this stupid hedge? Shira said. I walked over to the bushes. They looked very dense and very prickly. Excuse me, I said to the hedge. I would like to thank you for keeping the wolves and things out all night, and I would very much appreciate it if you would let us through now. That is the dumbest, Shira began, and the bushes rustled and parted. I grinned and stepped through. The branches shut behind me with a snap. Ow, said Shira. I turned around. She was still on the other side of the hedge. What happened? I yelled. What do you think happened? And you don't have to shout. I'm not that far away. Sorry. Make it open up again. I'll try, I said doubtfully. I addressed the bushes again. Excuse me, but you seem to have a friend of mine inside, and she can't get out. Will you please let her through? The bushes rustled smugly and didn't move apart at all. I'd really appreciate it if you would let her out, I said. She's nicer than you think. The bushes rustled again. This time they sounded skeptical. They still didn't open. Well, said Shira's voice. I sighed. They won't open up. I'm afraid you'll have to apologize. Apologize to a bush? Shira sounded outraged. I won't. I'll burn this hedge to cinders. Ow! Ow! I really think you'd better apologize, I said. Otherwise you probably won't get out before the wizards come. There was silence for a while. Finally, Shira said, Oh, all right. I'm sorry I said you were a stupid hedge. She paused. Now will you please let me through? Reluctantly, the bushes pulled apart. Shira sighed with relief and stepped through. She almost didn't make it. The bushes closed again so fast they caught a piece of her tunic. Hey, she said, stop that. I hate to mention this, I said, as I helped Shira work her tunic free, but you really ought to be more polite. To lizards and bushes? Ha! Shira jerked her tunic free and glared at the hedge. I mean it, I said. It only gets you into trouble when you're not. I'm a fire witch, she said sullenly. People are supposed to be polite to me. I thought you didn't like having everyone scared of you, I said. I turned to the bush. Thank you very much. The bushes rustled politely. I turned back to Shira, who was watching me with her mouth open. If you act that way all the time, I don't think people would like you very much, even if you weren't a fire witch. Goodbye. I turned around and started walking. Wait! I stopped. Shira ran up beside me. I'm sorry. I guess I'm not used to being nice to people. That could really get you into trouble in the enchanted forest, I said. Shira looked back over her shoulder at the hedge and shuddered. No kidding. Well, I'll try. All right, let's find something to eat. That was easier to say than to do. We found a bush that had some berries on it, but half of them were blue and half of them were red. I wasn't quite hungry enough to take a chance on them, and neither was Shira. Who knows what red and blue berries will do to you? If my fire magic doesn't always work, my immunity to magic might not always work either, she said. I'd hate to turn into something awful just because of a few berries. I thought that was very sensible. We kept going. Eventually, we found a clearing full of blackberry brambles. It was so ordinary that it looked very odd sitting there in the middle of the enchanted forest. The berries were full of seeds, but we ate a lot of them anyway. I picked some extras and tied them up in my handkerchief for later. When we finished, we started walking again. It wasn't a very exciting walk. The trees didn't get any smaller, the moss still covered the ground, and every once in a while there was a peculiar bush growing next to one of the trees. It would have gotten boring if Shiera hadn't been there. It was nice to have someone my own age to talk to. I'd never had any friends. Most people didn't want their children getting close to the enchanted forest, so Mother and I had never had any visitors except the princes and the heroes and so on. I told Shiera about living at the edge of the forest, and she told me about the town she lived in. I thought it was very interesting. By the middle of the morning, we were both hungry again. Blackberries don't stick with you for very long. We stopped and ate the berries I'd saved in my handkerchief. They were squashed and messy, but they tasted fine. When we finished, we walked some more. It was a warm day, and by the time we saw the stream, we were both very thirsty. "Water! Oh, great!" Shiera said as we reached the bank. It was a small stream, ankle-deep and a little too wide to jump. I could see the pebbles at the bottom. Shiera knelt on the bank and reached down. "Wait a minute," I said. "You shouldn't just drink that. You could turn into a rabbit, or lose your memory, or disappear or something." Shiera looked at me, then she looked at the stream. "I don't care," she said finally. "I'm thirsty." She leaned toward the water again. "But what if— Watch out!" I grabbed Shiera and pulled her away just as a huge swirl of muddy water came rushing down the stream. She scrambled back and stood up, and we watched the stream for a minute. It was now almost a river, deep and fast and angry. Shiera looked at me. "Thanks." "You're welcome. I guess we'll have to go back and—" I started to turn back towards the woods and stopped. There was dark water on that side of us, too. We were standing on an island, a very small island, and it was getting smaller every minute. I stared at the churning water, and my hands went to my sword. I don't know why. Most swords aren't any good against floods. As soon as I touched the hilt, I knew that it wasn't in the nature of this particular stream to do this sort of thing. I didn't know how I knew, but I was sure that someone was creating the flood. Right about then, I heard a chuckle. Not a nice chuckle. I was looking around for the chuckler when Shiera grabbed my arm. "Daystar, over there." I turned. A man was leaning against one of the trees. He had blue robes, sounds like a wizard, and black hair, and he held a wizard's staff in one hand. I didn't like the way he was watching Shiera. "Well, little fire witch, I seem to have caught you again," he said. "You leave me alone," Shiera shouted, "or I'll burn your staff too." The wizard chuckled again. He really had a nasty chuckle. "Oh, I don't think so. I've taken precautions, you see." He waved at the water that surrounded us and smiled patronizingly. That means he thinks he's better than you are. "Or weren't you aware that fire magic won't cross water?" Oh, I don't like him. "Magic may not cross water, but we can," I said. I was beginning to share Shiera's dislike of wizards. "Come on, Shiera, it can't be very deep." "Where did you find the hero?" the wizard asked. Shiera just glared at him. The wizard laughed. I didn't like his laugh any better than his chuckle. "I should give him something to do, don't you think? A monster, perhaps. Heroes like monsters." He waved his staff in the general direction of the flooding stream. The water on one side of our island bunched up and began to solidify rapidly. I didn't even have time to step back before the thing finished growing. When it was done, it looked sort of like a giant snake's head that dripped. That doesn't sound very good. The outlines kept changing because it was made out of water that wasn't completely solid, but it was pretty clearly a snake. It lunged at me. I dodged, barely in time, and drew my sword. Shiera yelled, and steam puffed from the snake head. The snake didn't seem particularly hurt. Some of the stream water bunched up around it, but that was all. I heard the wizard laugh again. "I'm afraid that won't work very well, young lady," he said. "You'd have to boil the whole stream away to get rid of my monster, and I don't think you can. Pity, isn't it?" Be patient. You'll have your turn in another minute, and then the head wizard will owe me a favor." The head lunged again. By now I was ready for it, but it was awfully fast. I dodged and struck at it with the sword, even though I wasn't sure what good it would do me to wound something that wasn't even alive. The sword made a humming noise. I heard the wizard shout, and then a sound like an explosion. The snakehead made a bubbly noise and collapsed in a wave of muddy water that swept over the little island Shiera and I were standing on, soaking everything. There's where they get wet. In another minute, the flood water drained away, leaving a lot of wet moss. And Shiera yelled again. I whirled around. Shiera was pointing. It took me a second to realize what she was pointing at. It was the big tree the wizard had been leaning against. A couple of short branches were lying at the foot of the tree, and the wizard was gone. That's the end of Chapter 3. Stay tuned next week for Chapter 4, in which they learn the perils of inspecting a wizard's broken staff. So, tune in next week. See you then. Have a wonderful evening or afternoon or morning or whatever it is where you are. Bye.